Released in 2004, the World of Warcraft has left quite the impact in the MMO genre and PC gaming as a whole. When someone says video game, the first thing that most people think of is Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, and World of Warcraft. Jokingly referred to as World of Warcrack due to its addicting nature, it took the MMORPG world by storm and reached tens of millions of subscribers. It's been parodied to death, emulated, and due to its success, even a movie was created about the Warcraft universe. Everyone has played it, or at least knows someone who's played it at some point. But the question is why? What secret does this game hold, and how did it capture such a broad audience? In this video, we'll cover its creation and go over all of the major events in the game's near 14-year timeline as of 2018 that made it what it is today. So, it all began in 1999. George Lucas's Star Wars The Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, was just released. Pokemon had the entire US population firmly in its grasp. The world was getting ready for the Y2K Armageddon, and more importantly, the game Everquest was launched. This was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG for short, and it was the first commercially successful one to use a 3D game engine. It really brought the genre to the forefront and showed just how much potential it had. Straying away from the established linear-style RPG at the time, rather going for more of an open-world sandbox and focusing on that massively multiplayer aspect. Behind the scenes of all of this, the first pulse of the World of Warcraft was recorded. Blizzard's Warcraft franchise was rolling strong at this point, with the first, Warcraft Orcs and Humans, being released in 1994, and following shortly after its sequel, Warcraft 2: The Tides of Darkness, in 1995. These were fun little strategy games, received quite well, with the sequel selling over 2 million copies and even getting an expansion called Beyond the Dark Portal. Enter the world of Azeroth. Humans, elves, orcs, trolls. It's the bread and butter fantasy setting with spells, dragons, and most importantly, a lot of potential. Too much to fit into a simple RTS game, as most of the lore was packed into the manuals that came with the game. But with this, Blizzard had 3 great franchises under their belts: Starcraft, Diablo, and their flagship, Warcraft. Diablo would see a widely acclaimed sequel in year 2000, and Starcraft in 2010, over a decade after the first. And in 2002, Warcraft saw a third installment in the series with Reign of Chaos, and the Frozen Throne expansion pack 1 year later in 2003. Once again, great little RTS games that improved on the previous games in almost every way. But still, too small a vessel for what Blizzard imagined the franchise to be. Lurking in the background, they had something else in mind. During these early 2000s, these MMORPGs were growing in popularity with games like Everquest, as mentioned earlier, Ultima Online, RuneScape, Star Wars Galaxies, and so on. It was something totally different, a huge virtual sandbox world for you to explore with people from all over the real world. The goal wasn't to finish a storyline or see a credit screen, it was what you made of it. You built your own story, and with thousands of others, you built your own communities and virtual world. The potential was there, and it was just a matter of time before one game in particular caught fire.
Beyond the gates of mighty kingdoms lies a vast, unexplored world.
Fast forward to 2001. World of Warcraft was first announced at the European Computer Trade Show. Making its debut with a cinematic, it promised a world of mystery, adventure, and danger. Not just a single-player real-time strategy game with a campaign that you could beat in a day like the previous games of the franchise, but rather, well, a whole world. A full 3D environment, a personalized avatar that you created, multiple continents, zones, races, classes, all of the bells and whistles of the MMORPG genre at the time. It was clear that Everquest was an inspiration in its design. But a simple clone won't cut it. They had to do something different, so what was their hook? Well, basically, it was that it would be more accessible to the everyday player. At this point, things such as XP or gear loss upon death, or even permanent character death were commonplace in the MMO scene, as well as picking your stats and putting in points during the character creation before you even knew what you were doing. It was pretty hardcore, so the World of Warcraft wanted to give a more laid-back and casual experience that didn't punish the player for dying or require extreme knowledge of RPGs in general to play. In a genre that was growing rapidly in popularity, they tried to appeal to this untapped market, all the while maintaining that while it'll be easy to learn, it'll still be just as hard as the others to master. As more and more details of the game were unveiled, the initial reaction was actually uneasiness from the fans of the series. The previous games were simple, single-player experiences. You buy a game, you pop it into your system, and you start playing. That's all you need, but MMORPGs broke these rules. You need an active internet connection to even play it, and not only that, in addition to the game, you also needed to pay an extra monthly subscription fee. Today, this is common, but back in 2001, even computers were still pretty new to a lot of us. What if we got a phone call while we were playing? What happens then? You had better hoped that you weren't in combat, that's for sure. I can hear those AOL login sounds now. And as for the subscription fee, is this a game or a magazine? It was much more foreign to the average gamer, and left many unsure of the direction of the series. Regardless, development continued throughout the years as more and more of the finer details of how the game was going to work were released. Via the Computer Gaming World magazine, issue 208, released in November 2001. Initially, there were just 3 races: humans, orcs, and taurens, and you would have vast character customization options, a huge selection of different armor and weapons to obtain. You'll be able to visit old areas in past Warcraft games, and of course new ones as well. Fans oohed and awed at the preview screenshots, and slowly but surely started to get an idea of the world that Blizzard was creating, and the anticipation of the end product grew and grew. To tide them over, the 3rd installment of the Warcraft franchise was released in July of 2002, as mentioned earlier. The big project, though, was World of Warcraft. At this point, around 50 people were all working together around the clock on the game, adding more and more of their planned features, giving previews, building the world, and trying to create something playable for the eager fans to test. They were stepping into unfamiliar territory for sure, but the passion for what they were creating carried them through it. This development continued until February 2004, when the first beta test launched. Finally, the game was opened up to the general public. 3 years after the initial announcement, and looking at screenshots, reading articles, and watching gameplay trailers, players at last got to enter the World of Warcraft. They were finally able to create their own avatar and start their own adventure. At this point, players found something that more resembled the actual November 2004 release of the game. Many more races were playable, several different classes, a working questing system, and so on. It was an MMO in the Warcraft universe, and after several months of testing, it saw its official release in North America, Australia, and New Zealand on November 23, 2004. Just as they had promised, the game offered a far more casual experience with low penalty to dying, easy to jump in, an easier learning curve with the combat, questing, and character building systems. It was the casual player's MMORPG, and at the time, very polished. All in all, it launched with 60 levels of character progression, 2 continents with 41 zones, 2 factions, the Horde and Alliance, with 8 playable races, 9 different character classes, hundreds and hundreds of quests, dozens of dungeons to crawl through, and 2 raids to complete. And to support the eager fanbase, 88 servers. Critics found few negative aspects to bring up, and it received numerous awards upon launch, with many more in the months to come. The world was entirely new, and for a lot of players, so too was the genre. There were refugees from other big MMOs like Everquest or Star Wars Galaxies, but due to its casual nature, the World of Warcraft was the first MMO for a lot of people. About 250,000 in fact, judging by the archived subscriber numbers, which was very good at the time. Remember, MMOs are still growing in popularity, and unlike the RTS games, which sold millions within the first few months of release, these required an active internet connection and a monthly subscription fee. Combine that with the stellar graphics at the time, and thus a good computer required to run it properly, to reach 250,000 sales and subscriptions through all of these hurdles was impressive to say the least. And, as word spread, this would be just a fraction of the game's peak. Its major competitor was Everquest, and although their subscription numbers were never public, based off of press sources, they were estimated to have around 400,000-ish around the time World of Warcraft released, and this would decrease in the months to come as Warcraft gained popularity. Whether it was dungeon crawling with a group of 4 friends, facing off against enemy players of the opposing faction, or going through a raid with 39 other members of your guild, players found themselves gripped by the new MMO and found it hard to put it down. It was everything they wanted, and more. Remember that term World of Warcraft I mentioned earlier. Even reaching the maximum level was very time-consuming, and addictions started becoming a common thing. People got fired from their jobs, or they just flat out quit to play more, and sadly, friendships and even lives were claimed with the most extreme cases. It was almost frightening how addicted people would get. It's a trait with MMORPGs in general, but it said a lot about the quality of World of Warcraft in particular with how wide it spread. As the subscriber numbers grew and grew, and it was becoming clear that this was the new MMO to play, Blizzard expanded into other regions with releases to South Korea in January of 2005, Europe 1 month later in February, and China in June of the same year. The race was on between regions and guilds to level to the max and to be the first to claim a raid boss kill. And finally, after 2 months, the raid boss Onyxia fell at the hands of the guild Ruined from the US on January 30th, 2005. As the players were progressing through these dungeons and raids, the subscribers grew and grew, and thus too did the investment of time and money into the game. Over time, it saw improvements in every aspect. Warcraft as a series was no longer Blizzard's flagship, it was World of Warcraft itself. More dungeons and raids would be added, the PvP would be improved, and so on to retain the player base. The subscriptions rose, reaching a staggering 1 million in February 2005, just 4 months after the launch, and more than double than EverQuest's projected peak. Just a few months later, in June of the same year, this number had tripled to an astonishing 3 million. The gaming world had World of Warcraft fever. Blizzard projected 1 million subscribers in 1 year, so to triple that in just half a year after launch was astounding. They weren't prepared hardware-wise and struggled to keep up with the growing player base. Server downtime became commonplace as they struggled to keep up. Kind of a good problem to have, but the frustration still arose, as you would imagine, being that it was a monthly subscription-based game. It was during this boon that it started spilling out into the real world. The first viral video showcased a player named Leroy Jenkins haphazardly charging into a dungeon room while his comrades came up with a plan for attack, resulting in their deaths.
It's a lot better than we usually do.
Alright, thumbs up.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins!
Oh my god, he just ran in.
Save him! Oh geez, stick it clean!
Oh Jesus, let's go.
The video caught on and was shared all over the place in various gaming forums, news websites, and even created a new term within the genre called Leroying, where a player foolishly charges into the fray with no regard to his own safety or that of his party members. In November of the same year, it became a piece of trivia in the popular game show Jeopardy! Although all 3 contestants didn't know the answer.
And that would be the World of Warcraft. All right, we have...
Leroy, you were just stupid as hell.
At least I have chicken.
Interestingly enough, going back to our subscriber chart here, the video released in May, and just 1 month later, the game saw one of its biggest spikes in subscriber numbers. You can't officially confirm any correlation here, but it's funny to think that one video may have actually had such a substantial impact in the popularity and spread of the game. In September of the same year, the World of Warcraft became a subject of study in epidemic and terrorism research when a virtual pandemic broke out within the world of Azeroth. Players could be afflicted with a spell called Corrupted Blood, which would damage them and also spread to nearby party members. This was intended to remain within the confines of a raid instance, but players found out how to bring it into the major cities with dense populations and maliciously spread it to other unknowing players and non-player characters. Within hours, these major hubs became uninhabitable as the disease spread between its dense population. Until finally, days later, Blizzard was able to remedy the situation by introducing a patch and restarting every server. This event would later be compared to the swine flu pandemic and is still used today in research in the spread of diseases. The World of Warcraft continued to grow, either through word of mouth or commercial advertisements, and nearly a year later, after the Leroy Jenkins video released, another video related to World of Warcraft went viral in April of 2006.
Odd groups go to left, even groups go to right. That means 1, 3, 5, 7 left, 2, 4, 6, 8 right.
Titled the Onyxia wipe animation, this didn't show the lighthearted mishaps of an overzealous adventurer, but rather that of a raid leader who was less than impressed at the performance of his comrades in their attempt to kill Onyxia, a raid boss.
Whelps! Left side! Even side! Many whelps! Now handle it! Fuck!
This instead displayed a darker side of the game of how much it gripped people and the consequences of addiction. Months later, in October, more light was shed on the game via the cartoon series South Park with their Warcraft theme, Make Love, Not Warcraft episode. The plot centered around 4 friends who cast away their social lives and health in exchange for becoming more powerful in the game to defeat an unnamed player who continuously kills lower level players for his amusement. This episode was watched by 3.4 million viewers, making it the highest rated mid-season premiere on the Comedy Central network since year 2000, and receiving the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Programs in 2007. Over a decade later, it still ranks upon the series' most popular episodes. With all of this surrounding the World of Warcraft, the game grew, and so too did its subscriber count, and by the end of the lifespan of the base game, 8 million players worldwide found themselves lost in the World of Azeroth. On January 16th, 2007, the first expansion set for World of Warcraft launched. Named the Burning Crusade, this expansion focused on culling the invasion of a demon army upon Azeroth, going through a portal into their realm and taking out their commanders, including returning protagonists and antagonists from the Warcraft franchise such as Illidan Stormrage and Kael'thas Sunstrider. It sold nearly 2.4 million copies within 24 hours of launch, making it the fastest selling PC game ever made at that point. The world was built in the base game, so now was the time to start adding more and more story. Every gameplay system was updated and improved, classes were balanced further, new dungeons and raids were added. It was an expansion set. A good one too, as the subscriptions continued to increase. Astonishingly enough, throughout the course of the base game and this expansion, there hadn't been a single month in which the World of Warcraft had lost subscribers. Not only was Blizzard drawing in new fans, but they were also retaining the current ones. And it was also during this time when Blizzard launched their unique ad campaign where celebrities would talk about their experiences in the World of Warcraft, such as Vern Troyer, Mr. T, and William Shatner, although Vern was the only one confirmed to have actually played the game.
I'm a mage. What's your game?
World of Warcraft, the #1 online game. Try it for free at warcraft.com.
The game progressed as normal, receiving more and more updates, and in January 2008, it broke the 10 million subscriber milestone, and even still, this would not be the peak. It was still the top MMO in the entire genre by a long shot, dwarfing all competition, which struggled to reach just 1 million subscribers. The competition did start to ramp up though. One of the first games, thought to be, quote, the WoW killer, was The Age of Conan, and it saw a release in May of 2008. The game boasted a unique reactive combat system, stunning graphics, and an adult theme. It won many awards for its showing at various gaming conventions. Upon release, it received favorable review from critics, but poor reviews from the players, citing bugs, missing zones, and a complete lack of endgame content. 1 million copies were shipped upon launch, but the subscriber number quickly declined as those flaws were uncovered. Warhammer Online, released in September of the same year, was also anticipated to be the MMO to overtake World of Warcraft. Similar in the fantasy setting with orcs, elves, and magic, it was the most comparable MMO to World of Warcraft yet, with a long-running franchise to back it up. The game saw little success, however, peaking with a mere 800,000 subscribers compared to World of Warcraft's 10 million, and dropping further to 300,000 in the months to come, before going free to play, and eventually a total shutdown on December of 2013, 5 years later. This was due to an overall unpolished experience compared to the World of Warcraft, a lacking endgame, and various technical problems such as erroneously billing players for multiple subscriptions in a single day, with the highest charges reported going into the thousands. Through all of this, the World of Warcraft sailed on with great success, and on November 13th, 2008, it saw its second expansion, The Wrath of the Lich King. Following suit with the Burning Crusade, another antagonist was brought in from the Warcraft franchise as Blizzard sought to bring more story and lore into the series. This time, it was Arthas Menethil, the Lich King, and Master of the Undead. Players launched a campaign in the continent of Northrend to challenge the Lich Lord at his own seat of power. And, just as you'd expect, more dungeons, raids, and more gameplay systems were added to satiate the now 10 million strong player base. 2.8 million copies in total were sold, breaking their own record of the fastest selling PC game of all time, set by the Burning Crusade expansion. This expansion revisited their initial design of a casual-friendly MMORPG. Combined with easier access to dungeons via a new system called the Dungeon Finder, this expansion was seen as the end of the hardcore era of World of Warcraft by many players, and many hold it in high regard as the peak of the game. A thought supported by the ever-growing subscriber numbers, with the game reaching its all-time peak of 12 million in October of 2010. Out of the released numbers, the game at this point had still never had a month where the subscribers dipped. Although reports came in less and less, starting with the Burning Crusade, there are a lot of skipped months where we very well could have seen a small dip. In the same year, China finally saw release of the Burning Crusade expansion 3 years after its original release. This is due to the amount of censorship needed to release the game. Bones and gore weren't allowed to be shown in excess, so many of the in-game assets had to be altered both in the base game and all of its expansions, thus slowing their release. They would only see a Wrath of the Lich King release months later due to the same reason. The expansion overall was a huge financial and critical success. However, although it was received well by players, it wasn't without problems outside of the game. On July 6th, towards the tail end of the expansion, Blizzard announced their plans to introduce the Real ID system on their official forums, which would change the author of all posts from the normally used in-game avatar to the real-life name tied to the poster's account. This was met with swift and heavy backlash by players and curious onlookers alike, spurring hundreds of third-party articles being published about the fiasco, addressing concerns about the privacy of the forum users. The situation quickly turned ugly as users started posting personal information of employees of Blizzard, such as phone numbers, their personal Facebook pages, and even their street addresses, and that of their friends and family. 3 days later, after an overwhelming negative response, Blizzard rescinded their plans to make the posters' names visible, although to this day, it still remains to be one of their biggest controversies. At the end of 2010, in November, the World of Warcraft saw its biggest change yet in its current 6-year run. The original launch continents, the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, had been completely changed and reworked in preparation for the new expansion, Cataclysm. Feeling that the world that they created in 2004 had become outdated, the land, quests, and classes saw major reworks in the game's most volatile expansion yet. More content was added, just like the previous expansion, and the ease of access design approach accelerated with the introduction of the Looking for Raid system, termed LFR for short, which made the endgame activity, raiding, much more accessible to the everyday player. More dungeons, raids, and the normal expansion updates came as you would expect. The hype was huge, and players were eager for a new adventure, and in similar fashion, Blizzard once more broke the record of the fastest selling PC game of all time, with 3.3 million copies sold on release. Once the players dived into the game, however, the reception was mixed for the first time, and in March of 2011, the World of Warcraft saw its first public loss of subscribers since its release in November 2004, over 6 years ago. The MMO genre in general at this point also declined in popularity. The market had become oversaturated with hundreds and hundreds of free-to-play MMORPGs, and what used to be a rising, unique genre became almost exhausting for gamers. Because of this, and the volatility of the Cataclysm expansion itself, the subscriber numbers continued to wane for Blizzard throughout the years of 2011 and 2012, dropping to its lowest to 9 million in July of 2012, just 75% of its peak 2 years prior. Another contributing factor to this decrease was the slowdown of content. The game is updated through major content patches, a practice that's been maintained at a steady pace up until the end of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Inter-expansion updates at this point were fairly reasonable. The time between the last patch for the base game and the release of the Burning Crusade was just under 3 months. This increased to just under 7 months between the end of the Burning Crusade and the beginning of the Wrath of the Lich King, and even further to 9 to 10 months between the end of the Lich King to Cataclysm and Cataclysm to Pandaria. These content droughts were seen as far too long by players, and slowly but surely they lost interest and found their gaming fix elsewhere. Blizzard finally saw their first increase in subscribers 2 years later with the release of the Mists of Pandaria expansion, where the war between the Horde and Alliance is reignited and they fight over control of an unexplored world. This would be short-lived, however, as the hype died down shortly after its release and interest continued to wane, dropping as low as 6.8 million subscribers in June of 2014, the lowest it's been since its initial rise to glory in 2006. The inter-expansion patch gap grew to 13 months, the longest yet. The new Warlords of Draenor expansion was announced, promising to go back to the roots of World of Warcraft and revisiting the same world as the Burning Crusade expansion before it became corrupted by the Burning Legion. We would go through the Dark Portal once more 7 years later and visit the world of Draenor and, once again, stop an invasion that threatens all life on Azeroth. This time, the antagonist is Grommash Hellscream, an orc warlord and the leader of the Iron Horde. The hype reached critical mass, and many anticipated the grand return of the World of Warcraft and relive their days in the Outland. The expansion saw a release on November 13th, 2014, and the game saw an explosion of new and returning players. In just 3 months, the game saw a 2.6 million subscriber increase, bringing it back to 10 million, the highest it's been since the launch of the Mists of Pandaria expansion, just in time for its 10-year anniversary. The expansion itself sold 3.3 million copies, matching their sales of the Cataclysm expansion 4 years ago. For the first time in a long time, players experienced queues to log into the game due to the servers being at full capacity. A good problem to have, you would think, but after 3 days of queues and extreme lag from the bustling launch, the patience of the players was tested. While the release of Draenor was a financial success, the expansion as a whole had little to offer. The raids added were far fewer compared to previous expansions, with just 3 throughout the entirety of it. A large amount of energy instead went into the garrison system, which served as the base of operations for the player in their campaign against the Iron Horde, something that was met with heavy criticism by the game's player base, citing that these garrisons had aspects of mobile gaming such as daily missions to launch to get rewards in both gear and gold. The garrisons themselves were also seen to be too powerful and offering too much to the player in their own separate instance, thus leaving little reason to ever leave them, taking away the biggest aspect of any MMO, and it made it seem like a single-player game at times, a problem that was exacerbated with the extreme loss of subscriptions that followed. After the initial hype died down, the game saw its sharpest decline in subscribers yet, quickly dropping from 10 million in December of 2014 to 7.1 just 3 months later in March of 2015, and further to 5.6 million in June of the same year, its lowest since December of 2005 during its rise. Blizzard chose to withhold information of their amount of subscribers from this point forward. With the little amount of content it had, the Warlords of Draenor trudged forward with its final patch, 6.2, just one of 3 major patches in the expansion if you count the pre-patch. The inter-expansion patch downtime was again staggering, clocking in at 13 months between 6.2 on June 23, 2015, and 7.0.3 on July 19, 2016. Through the success of the cash shop and the ability to buy level boosts and other cosmetic items, the Warlords of Draenor turned out better than expected financially for Blizzard, but the future of the game looked bleak. During this time, Blizzard looked for success outside of the game with their feature film, Warcraft. Directed by Duncan Jones, this movie brought the story of the Warcraft universe to the big screen and had been announced as early as 2006. It premiered in the United States on June 10, 2016, and while it grossed over $400 million worldwide, it was met with negative reviews and a disappointing domestic box office performance. Critics cited that the plot was confusing and hard to follow for those unfamiliar with the franchise. The next expansion, World of Warcraft Legion, released on August 30th, 2016. This expansion promised all of the normal things that players would come to expect out of an expansion at this point. More character levels, new gameplay features, raids, major updates to the core gameplay of each class, and, most importantly, a faster patch cycle. Including pre-orders, they had sold 3.3 million copies by the end of its release date. The actual expansion received a fair reception. Without any public subscription numbers, only Blizzard knows, but overall, Legion was a nice recovery from the Warlords of Draenor. The more minor patches became more major, and their speed in general was increased, with around 11 weeks between these patches, giving players something to work on and trying to avoid those long droughts that became commonplace at this point. The problems from Draenor were addressed, and there were no garrisons, instead being replaced by the toned-down order hall system, and over the course of its 2-year run, it's had 5 raids, a respectable amount, and many new features added within the game, making it technically one of the biggest expansions yet in terms of raw content and new features. This brings us to the current day. The next expansion is the Battle for Azeroth, which seemingly reignites the war between the Alliance and the Horde once more. It's set to launch on August 14th, 2018. This video was made during the inter-expansion downtime, which will be about 6 months. Not too bad, and it's a number that they haven't met since the Burning Crusade to the Wrath of the Lich King drought. So, that's the current near 14-year history of World of Warcraft. What a long and strange trip it's been. Highs and lows for sure. Some people believe that the highs are all behind us, and what's made the game special has faded away during its 14-year run, and others still have just as much fun as they did back in November 2004. In the beginning of the video, I asked what made it special. What was it about this MMO that touched so many for the past 14 years, such that there exists several emulated servers for each expansion, and even an upcoming official release by Blizzard of the game in its original vanilla state over a decade ago? I don't think it's one simple answer, but it's what I said earlier. In comparison to the other reigning MMOs at the time, it was designed to be much easier to get into, foregoing those harsh penalties to dying, and just having an easier learning curve in general. The ease of access quickly caught on, and it was the first MMO for many people, and your first MMO is a pretty unique and memorable experience. Being used to linear single-player RPGs such as Final Fantasy or Zelda, and stepping into this massive world for the first time, and you didn't go through it alone. You made friends, joined guilds, and went through the toughest challenges together. The concept of a boss that took 40 people to kill was foreign to a lot of players. You watched your character and the game evolve before your very eyes over the course of years, not days nor weeks like the classic RPGs. It delivered a fresh and unique product in a growing genre, and left a huge impact in the MMO scene, on the gaming industry as a whole, and on the people who've played it, and it'll go down as one of the greats in gaming history. It's a story that's had ups and downs, and continues to this day. For some, it ended long ago, but for others, the drums of war thunder once again.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.